Today's episode is brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between climate consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climbing Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's extra special 150th episode of Climbing Consulting. I cannot believe that we are at episode 150. 6 years ago, when I started this podcast, I thought I would do 2 or 3 episodes and then I would mothball the series, never for it to be seen again. And thankfully, thanks to you, my listeners, thanks to my fantastic guests, that has not been the case. And we are here 150 episodes later. I've met some amazing guests through all of the interviews that I've been able to do. And I've also met some fantastic listeners, people like you. And thank you to you, because you are what makes this show what it is. There wouldn't be a show for me to do. There wouldn't be guests to invite. There wouldn't be guests to speak to if it wasn't for you listening to this, for you messaging me, saying how much you're enjoying it, for you recommending guests. And it's your messages that really do matter and really touch me, because I started this podcast to help our industry, to help people climb in consulting. And so hearing how this podcast has helped you in your career, helped you to grow your business, helped you to launch your business, those messages mean so much to me. And thank you for sharing them. Thank you for listening. And I'm really pleased that you are getting value, you are learning, you are getting benefit from what my guests are sharing on the show. And so for today's episode, I wanted to do something a little different and also give you as much value as I could from the 150th episode. So what I did over summer is I went back through all of our analytics and looked at who were the top all-time guests of the series so far. And I reached out to them to ask if they would come on for a unique episode where they share their answers to 5 key questions. And I'll let you hear what those are in a moment. And for today, we have some fantastic guests, some of our all-time top listened to guests, the people who you have loved listening to the most, who have kindly come back to share their answers to this fantastic set of questions. And listening to all of their answers, I have been getting so much from them, and I know that you are going to as well. So who are we hearing from? In alphabetical order, we have Adrian Bettridge, we have Keith Burgess, we have Mark Campbell, and we have John Howard. 4 fantastic consulting leaders that I know you have loved because I've seen the stats, and I know you are going to really enjoy what they have to share in this special 150th episode. So with the intro all done, thank you again, and please enjoy today's episode of Climbing Consulting.
Can you share a pivotal moment in your career that significantly influenced or altered your approach to leadership? What was the context and what did you learn from it?
One of the greatest ways to learn about leadership, particularly in consulting, is from those around you. And so having role models and people that you can observe in their day-to-day interactions really inspires or sometimes detracts from your experience at work. And you can learn just as much from positive experiences as you can from negative ones. One particular thing that sticks out in my career was as a senior manager, I went from working from one partner who was expansive, inclusive, invited me into his office. And every time we started an assignment together, he said, "What do you think? How do you think we should approach this? What would you do?" And I felt so much on the inside of the tent with him, so included and informed. And like I was shaping the approach to the program, shaping the work with the client, and felt so motivated to work for him. It was inspiring. And then straight after him, I worked for a different leader who was controlling, minimizing. I got just as much time with him. He'd invite me into his office and I'd sit down. But then as someone else would come into his office, he would badmouth them, talk about them, throw them under the bus, tell me after they'd left that they're not very good, and was really duplicitous in the way in which he spoke to someone face to face versus how he spoke about them after they'd left the room. And so that insight as a senior manager that actually these partners, both very senior, both very seasoned, had a completely different approach to the people that they were working with. Some really treasured their inputs, valued their contribution, and treated them almost like a peer. And the other partner diminished the individuals when they weren't in the room and treated them like a resource that could be thrown on the bonfire after he'd got what he wanted out of them. And I guess as a young senior manager, I must have been about 30 at the time, I remember reflecting as I finished that 18-month period working for two different bosses that there's only one way to do this if you're going to do this properly, because the second guy is the reason I resigned from Accenture. And the first guy is someone who's been a real sort of inspiration and role model for me that I've tried to live up to and apply in the way in which I lead others.
How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite? And if so, what specific lessons did you learn that our listeners might benefit from?
Favorite failures. I guess I've got a sort of a micro one and a macro one that are worth sharing. The micro failure would be I sold a piece of work to a bank, and through a friend of mine who I'd worked with for years, she knew me. It was a really engaging and easy sale. I knew I was on the inside track because we had history and a relationship of trust. And we started this piece of work and got off to a flying start, or at least I thought so. And in the process of mobilizing the program, point one was to do a review of the work that had already been done, bring it to the steering group and present our findings. In the presentation of our findings to the first steering committee, because I had such trust with the program manager, we kind of went a little bit long on this is broken, this isn't set up for success, you haven't got the right skills and resources, but don't worry, we're here to save the day and support you, and we'll bring all this talent to the table to make sure you can execute this strategy. My mistake was not briefing and the pre-briefing with each of the stakeholders of the steering committee, because the CIO, the boss of the person who'd hired us, stopped the meeting and said, "Who are you?" And I kind of stopped in my tracks and said my name, Adrian, and from Beringa, and leading this, QA, and then on to the mobilization of the program. He said, "I want you to leave. Can you please get out of the room?" And I just went cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was embarrassed. And she said, "I started this program. This is my baby. No one comes in here and criticizes my work without speaking to me." And she kicked me out of the meeting room. Now, my senior manager and manager who are left in the room looked at me with their jaws wide open, thinking, what do we do now? But they built good rapport, managed to rescue the relationship between the firm. But that individual has never really welcomed me into her office or wanted to work with me personally again, because I assumed too much and didn't do my homework on pre-briefing and working with stakeholders. That was a huge lesson for me, that when you're overconfident, coming across as arrogant, no one likes it. It doesn't serve you well. It doesn't serve them well. So take the time to do your homework, meet with everybody before you make assessments and assume things about how things have been set up and run, and don't lead with your jaw with senior people that you haven't done the homework with. So that was a really important failure for me, because it really made me do all my stakeholder management work thoroughly from that moment onwards. So that would be a personal failure and a real lightning bolt learning moment for me, and quite an embarrassing one, and one that my team reminded me of as well. You know, coming out of that situation and feeling slightly embarrassed, humbled, and not by choice, but by circumstance and by me being slightly over my skis, was a really important lesson for me. The first is to not take myself too seriously. Having some of my junior teammates around me witnessing my failure firsthand, I had to turn into a lesson for me and hopefully for them and broader people, just to swallow a big dose of humble pie and say, look, we all make mistakes. I made a big mistake on this. In fact, that you were there is brilliant for our business, because you get to pick up the pieces. You can build a relationship that I've been unable to do. And hopefully you won't make the same mistake, because you've just witnessed me with my size 11s putting my foot right in it. And hopefully you will be able to learn some lessons from this as well. And then sharing and owning the story. Sometimes we want to bury the things that don't go our way and pretend they don't happen. But if we don't take ourselves too seriously, share those stories with a bit of humor so that other people can see that either you win or you learn a lesson. I don't really believe in failure. I think failure is just nature's way of giving you feedback that you were too dumb to hear first time. And this big failure was a big dose of feedback that taught me a lesson. So I don't really count it as a catastrophic moment in my career. I count it as an opportunity to learn, and then take that learning, share it widely with, everyone on your podcast. And I've shared that story inside all of Baringa. Every time we have a favorite failure, a version of that story or others, I've got plenty of them come out. And so I think owning it, sharing it, and being humble about it really helps. I think there's another thing you have to be careful of on personal failures is it doesn't mean you swing the pendulum to the other side. I'm an instinctive, intuitive operator. And now, what that failure hasn't done is made me slow right down, not trust my gut, not trust my instinct. It's just given me the opportunity to elevate out of a situation, press pause, sometimes just for 10 seconds or for 24 hours before I send something in an email or a report, to think, who else might need to know what I'm about to share? And can I do a little bit more of a consult before I present our findings? So you don't want to overcorrect and get paralysis because you trusted your gut and your instinct last time and never trust it again. I think that sixth sense, that instinctive, intuitive consulting sort of voice in your head is still so important in getting to the nub of an issue and calling things out when you're with clients. But also just having a momentary pause allows us to reflect and make sure that we're taking everyone on the journey with us. So those would be some of my lessons I've learned from that failure and turning it into a learning opportunity for me and for others. There's a macro one that's really interesting. Starting the business in 2007, building a financial services business, Lehman's going bust in 2008, September, meant that I'd built a team and we went into probably the most rocky period in consulting history, at least in my career at that point. And I had 20 odd people trying to build an FS consulting business. And the market failure meant that we were really struggling to get traction with clients. Banking clients were exiting consultants just as I was trying to grow a business. And the thought of all of those people who I'd just hired in the last 18 months, having to let them go, was really motivating for me and something I didn't want to do. And it made us sharpen our pencil, made us really get down into what is it that clients would buy even in a recession. That market failure probably fine-tuned my sales approach, the shape of our organization in terms of wanting more senior experts who could hit the ground running without too many junior people who didn't know what they were doing, how important personal relationships were going to be, relationships of trust with our clients. And we ended up navigating the storm of the end of 08 and all of 09 and 10, actually growing our business as we learned from the market failure, actually what even in a recession would our clients buy. So sometimes the toughest time to build a business is when you learn the most. And that stood us in good stead in terms of Bringer's strategy and our approach to business building, content expertise, and deep personal relationships that stayed with us ever since. So even though at the time I thought I'd made a huge mistake and was panicking about the market context we were in, building a business through a recession is probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
How have you approached goal setting during your career, and what, if anything, about your approach has changed as you've advanced? Can you provide an example of a significant goal and how your approach helped you achieve it?
Goal setting was a huge part of my personality and makeup coming out of university. I wrote down the different roles in my life of son and brother, consultant, friend, and used to set goals each New Year's Eve for the different roles in my life, how to be a better son, how to be a better brother, how to be a better consultant. So goal setting has always been in my DNA. If anything, an example of that would be I went for my interview in Anderson Consulting in 1994 and wrote down on a Post-it note what I could read from the brochure in front of me in reception of Arundel Street, number 2 Arundel Street. This is how long it goes from being an analyst to you can get promoted to consultant. This is consultant to manager. This is manager to senior manager and senior manager to partner. And I wrote down how long it would take for each step, the year I was going to join, and then for when would I make partner, and carried that Post-it note around in my wallet for 10 years. So 1995, I joined Anderson Consulting in August. In 2005, September, I made partner 10 years later. So that goal that I wrote down in Arundel Street on a Post-it note, I carried around for 10 years until I'd achieved making partner there. So quite geeky, quite self-disciplined and controlled around the importance of goals and how they help you visualize and create discipline in your life so that you can pursue things that are purposeful and meaningful to you. Goals are in their role in my life at that micro level have always been important. I guess in my last 10 years as a managing partner of the firm, I've seen them as important, but not necessarily the strategic way of living. So I've elevated myself and simplified my approach to goal setting now to over 3-year horizons or 5-year horizons, and also simplified my annual process down to what's my theme for the year? What's my overarching narrative for a year rather than being so micro on all the different roles in my life? What's the overall sentiment I want to achieve this year? So I've elevated out of the micro and have much more sort of strategic, wide-ranging goals that are more to do with a feeling or an emotion or a value, an attribute that I'm trying to embed within my life, like kindness or patience, and I still have goals like, lose weight or improve my 10K times. I have some micro things around physical things, but when it comes to work, I'm thinking, what's the tone that I need to set this year? And how do I communicate that for the whole company and not just make it a personal thing? I'll just give you one example of that goal setting. I write a Monday morning musings to the whole company every Monday. And I always do one around New Year's, around goals and setting a tone for the year. And my goal for the year last year was to be anti-fragile, and to pick a cool word like that, explain what it means, and then to dive in a little bit around how do we make our business more anti-fragile? How do we actually use diversity of the industries that we're working in and the geographies that we're working in to build resilience? Then how do you apply that to you as an individual? How do you become more anti-fragile? How do you learn from your failures? How do you take the things that are happening to you and almost see them as therapy and think, what do I learn from this? And how do I improve as a result? So take a thematic view of a goal or a word or an attribute, and then look for lots of ways to explore that during the year. So those are some of my approaches historically to goal setting, how they've been quite important in driving my focus and decision making and choices. And then more recently, a more strategic, high level, thematic, tone setting approach to using goals to set the scene for the year in front of me. I think having micro goals is really important on personal things. When it starts to be about organizational goals that involve other people, I think you have to get really good at communicating the narrative and tapping into emotion of others. It's okay to be really disciplined and quite controlling on yourself, like intermittent fasting 4 days a week. That's something you can impose on yourself as a discipline. But when it comes to goals that impact other human beings, whether it's families, whether it's teams, whether it's organizations, you want to take a more strategic, longer term view. And we operate within Burgess at 3 time horizons, an 8-year time horizon. Where's our vision? Where do we want to be in 2030? A 3 to 5 year time horizon. What's our strategy that's going to help us get there? And then a 12-month plan. What are the things we need to nail in the next 12 months? And I think personally, for individuals and organizationally, operating on multiple time horizons stops you from becoming rigid or too controlling of others, and allows you to flip from, this is our plan for the year, but it's in the context of my bigger strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. And within the 3 to 5 years, can I look up and have a really clear understanding of my destination? Can I articulate that for others so that it's inspiring and motivating and not controlling like a 1-year plan is? So operating goals and plans and strategies and visions over multiple time horizons, I find really helpful so you don't get stuck in a rut around micromanaging the in-year plan versus being too wishy-washy just with an 8-year vision, but nothing in between. So operating over multiple time horizons, I find really useful, both for myself and organizationally, to make sure that when we're setting goals and we're laying out strategy for people, it's inspiring and not too controlling and to micromanaging.
Having worked with countless consultants, what sets the best apart from the rest, and what common traits do you see in those at the top of their game? Are there any behaviors or mindsets that consistently lead to success?
I've had the privilege of working with some amazing consultants, and all different, whether they're technical, strategic, operationally excellent in their field, different industries and in different businesses, not just within Burgess or Anderson's where I've worked. There are certain qualities and characteristics that if you pull them out, stand out head and shoulders, that allow someone really to excel in their chosen consulting field. And here would be some of those characteristics that just make a huge difference to whether or not someone's going to fly in consulting. The first, I would say, is self-awareness. You have to operate in a low ego manner. Know what you're good at, know what you're not good at. Having high self-awareness is the access mechanism to all future learning for you. With low self-awareness, you may have high IQ, you may be really good at something, but with low self-awareness, you bump up against colleagues, you come across as arrogant with clients. And having high self-awareness helps you to deliver your expertise with humility and continue to be on a learning journey. And those who learn the most grow the most, particularly in consulting. Another quality or characteristic of those who are most successful in consulting would be grit or resilience, being anti-fragile. Grit and resilience are such key qualities in consulting because rejection is just part of the game. It's not personal. When you don't win a deal, when you lose out to the competition, what can you learn? Feeling like this is a disaster or being really emotional about a loss doesn't help you, doesn't help your team, and doesn't help your organization. Perseverance and patience in the pursuit of selling and building a business are absolutely critical to be a successful consultant. The combination of great consultants, or the combination of these two qualities, is often found in great consultants, which is good IQ and great EQ. We used to trade out in the early 90s and early 2000s on IQ. It was all about where you went to university and your IQ. And I think that's a mistake. I don't have a great IQ, and I work with loads of other people who are hugely successful consultants because of the combination of IQ and EQ. Consulting is a relationship game. It's about building relationships with colleagues, building relationships with clients. It's people wanting to work with you, both internally and externally. So IQ is important, but the combination of IQ and EQ, that's what makes for a powerful consultant and someone who's likely to excel in their career. Great consultants network really well. And it doesn't make them extroverts. You can be an introvert, but really good networker. And what do I mean by that? There's networking on the inside of your organization as well on the outside of your organization. Setting up coffees, keeping in touch with people you worked with, being curious about somebody else's skill set who's just joined your business and reaching out to them and adding them to your network, because we face lots of really strategically challenging problems that we're trying to solve for our clients that can require us to draw upon skills that not only we don't have or haven't experienced, but if you've got a big network, you can reach into your network and find people who can come and help you solve things. So great consultants are great team players and networkers. They don't rest on their laurels and think, I've got enough friends, I know enough people, I'm in my clique. They purposefully get out of their clique, explore other people's skills, and are curious enough to stay in touch with people long after they've worked with them, both internally and externally. Consulting also is a growth mindset game. You have to be thinking about how am I going to grow myself personally by 10, 15% each year. Consultants that rest on their laurels, that feel like they're the finished article. And I see this sometimes with people who make partner. And I say to those who make partner, this is the time where you're going to learn the most, not where you dine out on your last 15 years worth of experience, but actually where you need to be changing and learning more than you have done previously in your career. What got you here into the partnership isn't what's going to make you a successful partner. So having a growth mindset, willing to break yourself down, improve yourself by 10 to 15% each year is critical. And I guess the final attribute that makes a consultant stand out from their colleagues is that they are incredibly comfortable with always selling. Not that they're a shiny shoes kind of salesperson, but they're looking for opportunities to add value to clients. They build great relationships. They ask sometimes awkward or difficult questions of their clients because they're poking intellectually at ways that they might add additional value. And so great consultants are always selling subtly, slowly, not aggressively, but they're looking for opportunities where they and their teams could add more value to their clients, always being slightly uncomfortable with the status quo in their history, thinking that they have to prove themselves again. So there's a little bit of insecurity that we've talked about before, Nick, in the way that they approach their world, which is, I need to get better. I need to make sure I'm doing the right thing. And they're always looking for opportunities. Someone who's a great consultant is always scanning the horizon for additional opportunities where they can add value to clients, which leads to great sales opportunities for them and their business.
Since our last interview, what book or books have you read that have greatly influenced your thinking or approach to consulting and leadership? How have you applied the insights from these books in your work?
I love to scan different business books and books about personal growth and opportunities to basically learn from other people's experience and their wisdom. You think about 20 years of their life, 4 years of work to create a book, and it's published, and I get to read it in 3 days, and I get to condense those 20 years of learning into 3 days of absorbing that content. So I'm an avid reader, and I love to read 2 books recently that on a similar topic that have really stood out and have influenced the way I think about my role, think about the business, and think about my life. Were The Second Mountain by David Brooks and From Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks. And both of them tap into what does success look like for your life? And we come out of university. My son's just graduated from university. He's just finished his master's yesterday. And he's got his whole career in front of him. And of course, he's focused on, where am I going to work? Where am I going to live? How am I going to pay my rent? What's my first job going to pay me? Am I going to enjoy it? Who will I be working with? How do I climb the ladder of success as the world lays it out in front of him post-university? And of course, you're going to climb, as David Brooks talks about in his book, the first mountain. Enough money to pay some bills, own a car, put food on the table, enjoy a little bit of disposable income, not get yourself into too much debt or pay off some of those debts, and then, build some success criteria in the traditional sense of that word. But when you've achieved some measure of success, and when you get to a certain age, obviously I've turned 50 recently, and these two books were as you turn 50, you need to read these books from some of my friends. And I've read them, and it really is fascinating to think that our first mountain of what we consider to be success, when you get to some degree of success in that mountain, you realize that whilst necessary for a fulfilling first chapter in your life, there is a second mountain you're going to want to climb, which is imparting the wisdom you've learned to the next generation, which is becoming a good teacher, which is, how do I give back? How do I create a legacy, not a personal legacy like on a building named after me, but how do I actually pass on and share the wisdom, the insights, the learning that I've benefited from to others? So this second mountain, this thoughts of legacy, the challenge of creating something that outlives me, outlives my life, but makes a contribution and an impact to other people, is something that I find really inspiring, really motivating, and helps me channel my energy into the type of leader I want to be, creating opportunities for other leaders to lead and be successful. How I think about Bringer's legacy in terms of, we have approaches all the time for people to come and buy our firm. We're not interested in selling it. We want it to be a legacy business that lives and outlives any of us as individuals. We're stewarding it for the next generation and hand it over to them and help them to have a fun entrepreneurial experience of leading and growing the business. So these two books, The Second Mountain and From Strength to Strength, really tap into that maturing wisdom of becoming an elder in your community. And now I'm over 50, I can put myself into that category and working out, how do I make the most positive impact to my community, to my friends, to my family, to those I work with over the medium and the long term, and worry less about short-term goals and aspirations. It's fascinating to think about how you take all your skills, everything that you've learned, and now apply it more altruistically to the benefit of those in your circle of influence around you. And it's really deeply motivating and inspiring as well. It really grabs me as a concept that I'm going to be exploring.
I really hope you are enjoying today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you want to get ahead, you want to move your consultancy, your career forward, and you want to learn even more, then I would definitely recommend checking out our brand new marketing-focused podcast, Brand and Deliver. In this series, we dive in to the best, the latest, the newest in consulting marketing and professional services marketing at large to help you get the edge in your firm. If you go to your podcast app, type in Brand and Deliver, it'll be there, or go to our website to podcast and you can find it there and click your favorite episode. I hope you enjoy it.
The first question is, can you share a pivotal moment in your career that significantly influenced or altered your approach to leadership? And what was the context and what did you learn from it? So there's a leadership development course that I'm responsible for these days in IBM. And when I first attended the course myself, we were given a book by the Arbinger Institute, which I think is called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it contains the concept of the outward mindset. As a leader, we can have either an inward mindset or an outward mindset. In simple terms, how do we treat other people? And there's a parable in there, well, it's a real story, of Dr. Semmelweis, who was a doctor in Vienna in the early 1800s. And he was responsible for a maternity ward, and some of the patients were were looked after by doctors and many patients were looked after just by midwives. And he noticed that midwives had a much lower mortality rate amongst their patients than those of the doctors. And also he noticed that the doctors were doing other work with cadavers or dead bodies, I think it says in the story. And it took a while for him to realize that the issue was actually himself. The parable in there is that as leaders, are we the cause of the problems? And as leaders, it's far easier to change ourselves than it is to change others. So if we have an inward mindset as a leader, then we treat others as objects, either as vehicles to get us to a particular objective we want to get to, or as obstacles getting in our way, or just irrelevances. So if we have an outward mindset, then we can realize that we ourselves might be able to change, be out of the box towards other people, and to care for them and their needs and their objectives as much as we care for our own, and treat people as people. So that was, in a very short, brief summary, one of the key lessons I learned early in my leadership development career. The second question is, how has a failure or an apparent failure set you up for later success? And do you have a favorite failure? And what specific lessons did you learn that others might benefit from? And I was thinking about a project or a program I was involved in many years ago for a retail client. And I can probably mention their name because they're no longer around. It was MFI. They were a manufacturer and retailer of flat pack furniture, a bit like a British IKEA, I suppose. And they'd been implementing SAP, an ERP system, for a while, and it had a few problems. And we were called in as consultants to help fix a whole number of projects. And I was set up as the program manager there. And for each project, I set up a status reporting system involving 7 key measures, such as was the scope of the project clear, were the risks and issues being managed, were the right team involved in the project, that sort of thing. And each week, each project had to report to me on a sort of red, amber, green status, how their 7 key measures were. And if they were red or amber, that would be the area I would focus on over the next week to fix any issues that they were seeing. And one project, amongst the probably about 100 that I was overseeing, one of them was reporting green every week. So I thought, well, that's fine. They're constantly green, no help needed. I'll focus my attention and my efforts on the other 99. And then it came to the point where that one project was due to go live. Nothing happened. So I spoke with the project manager for that particular project and said, you've been reporting it the last 7 weeks. You've been reporting everything green, yet we haven't gone live. What's going on? And there was obviously a failure of communication between him and me. And he thought he would only need to report red or amber if there was a progress issue he was having, if he was actually in the project and things were going wrong. However, he hadn't even been able to start the project because he was waiting for a piece of IT equipment to be installed. And so he just marked everything as green every week. So the couple of lessons I learned from that. One is that communication is key in any consulting role, and particularly in the role of a project manager. Communication isn't just about me transmitting information, but listening and asking open questions to understand where each of my stakeholders is. So that's one key lesson. And the other is that when you're looking at status reports on projects, people are generally not very happy to report issues. In fact, issues and risks can perhaps be a dirty word. So if a report is constantly green, you need to find out really, is that, I'm not saying people being dishonest, but are they happy to talk about issues they've got? Is there an open culture where you can ask for help, put your hand up? So a couple of key lessons that I think you might benefit from as listeners to this podcast. The third question is about goal setting. How have you approached goal setting during your career? And what, if anything, about this approach has changed as you've advanced in your career? And can you provide an example of a significant goal and how your approach helped you to achieve it? I would say I'm not the best at goal setting in my career. And if I were to do it again, and perhaps I was more ambitious, I would advise others to do differently from me. I remember someone who was far more traditionally successful in their career, went on to become a senior partner and various other significant executive roles. He once said to me that when he began as a consultant, he set himself not a plan for a career, but at least key milestones in his career. By this date, or by this age, this is where I want to be. And having those key milestones didn't mean he knew how to achieve them, but he knew when or by when he wanted to be where, and he could adjust that. And I remember at the time he was talking, he was able to say how close or how far away he was from the current milestones. So I think that's clear. And then from that example, rather than having a plan, having milestones, that enables you to get the mentors and coaches that you need. And I'd say that's the other significant thing about goal setting is you shouldn't be on your own. Even if you're in a small organization, get yourself mentors, people who've been there before and done similar roles who can advise you how to achieve your goals. And get yourself coaches, people who can ask those straightforward questions, maybe things that are in your subconscious, bring them out of yourself. Coaches coaching you like a sports coach, but in a career way to help you achieve your goals. The fourth question is, having worked with countless consultants, what sets the best apart from the rest? And what common traits do you see in those that are at the top of their game? Are there any specific behaviors or mindsets that consistently lead to success? So I think when you're starting out in consultancy as a junior consultant, the expectations are that you're an expert in something. These days, typically that might be artificial intelligence. That's a big part of the consulting world that I operating in. And a more junior consultant would be someone there who has expertise in the artificial intelligence offerings and how they can be applied in business. Similarly, over the years, it's been ERP systems, it's been target operating models, it's been leadership styles. But at a junior level, it's been about your expertise and informing and directing a client into the right way to proceed. As you move up in your career, I think the more successful consultants move from more of a mentoring role, applying your own expertise, to applying your consulting skills. So asking open questions in a catalytic style. You'll be dealing with bigger problems of bigger complexity that haven't necessarily been solved before by other people. You can't bring the experience of one engagement to another engagement because this is a new problem that the C-level executive is asking you to help them solve. So the skills you need to apply as you're more senior in leading your client and in leading your team are more of those listening, facilitative skills, the catalytic of asking questions, the leadership I talked about in the answer to question one of treating people as people and supporting them, building their confidence as well as their competence, and noticing feelings, noticing the body language of your clients and things they're not saying, and helping hold up a mirror to reflect that. So moving from being a sort of prescriptive, informative sort of consultant to a more of a facilitative catalyst to bring about change in your clients that you serve. So the final question, question 5, is, since our last interview, what book or books have you read that have greatly influenced your thinking or approach to consulting and leadership? And how have you applied the insights from these books in your work? So I was lucky enough to get a preview copy of a book by an old friend of mine, a very successful business leadership coach, John Blakey. And his latest book, which has just been published, is called Force for Good. And its subtitle is How to Thrive as a Purpose-Driven Leader. So this book, the key concept here is being a purpose-driven leader, finding what your purpose is in a post-pandemic world, and supporting that with leading people and looking after the planet. And purpose-driven leadership, he divides that into 3 areas of leading upwards, leading inwards, and leading outwards. The up being, what's your sort of higher calling? What's your purpose? And finding out what really motivates you. And then having found that motivation, how do you lead yourself inwardly? Manage your motivation, manage your resilience, manage your well-being, or as he might put it, the subtle art of not giving up. And then thirdly, leading outwards, leading those that follow you, protecting the team while forgiving the individual. And there were a lot of similarities to the outward mindset from Arbinger in that part of the book. And it's about becoming a leader who's a beacon of hope to the people you lead in the post-pandemic world. Great book, and I thoroughly recommend.
The first question you asked me to reflect on was to share a pivotal moment in my career that significantly influenced or maybe altered my approach to leadership. And you wanted me to give you a little bit of context about that incident and indeed what I learned from it. Now, I think I mentioned in the full podcast interview that I did with you that perhaps the most influential mentor I had in my career was Linton Barker. Now, Linton was chair at Hydra when I was CEO. No doubt a good number of your maybe older listeners will know Linton as prior to going to Hydra, he had actually been head of PwC consulting across EMEA. Anyway, I recall sitting down with Linton for one of my regular catch-ups, and he said to me, somewhat cryptically, because that was often a style he adopted, he said to me, Mark, you need to change the way you walk across the office in the morning. So I looked at Linton. I was, as you can imagine, a little bit bewildered and a little bit nonplussed. And I said, do you mean literally? And he said, yes, I mean literally. You see, just to give a bit of context to this, where I sat in the Hydra office was across an open plan consulting floor. So when I came into the office in the morning, I had to walk across most of the consulting floor to where I sat on the other side. And Linton gave him the feedback. He said, when you enter the door in the morning, because you are the CEO, pretty much everyone looks up and they're watching you. Now, Linton said to me, Mark, you're often quiet and typically deep in thought. And I can tell that you're looking to get to your desk. You're focused on your to-do list. You want to start and get your teeth into the day. But what you don't appreciate, told me, was that people are looking at you. They're trying to pick up signals. And every single thing that you say and do, or don't do for that matter, has a message. So if you're looking down, if you're quiet, if you're contemplative, people can put an interpretation into that. What's Mark worried about? Are the business results looking poor? Is there something happening which maybe he's not telling us? And of course, if you're not careful, Linton said, people will come to their own and usually wrong conclusion. Now, as usual with Linton, there was a literal and a metaphorical meaning. Yes, he did mean I needed to walk with a bounce in my step, with my head up, engaging with people, speaking to them, being full of energy and enthusiasm. But the even bigger message that I certainly took away from that conversation was that as a leader, almost everything you say and everything that you do has a ripple effect across the business, probably far greater than you can imagine. It's not just what you do and say, but how you do it and how you say it. The leader sets the tone for the company. You are, if you like, a lightning rod for culture, a lightning rod for values and behaviors. What's acceptable? How things happen around here. So if you're going to execute your role as a leader really effectively, you have to have the maximum levels of self-awareness and use that self-awareness to the benefit of the business. So make sure you are letting people focus on the positives, radiating enthusiasm and energy, and transmitting that, as I say, in not just what you do, but how you do it. So the second question you asked me to reflect on was, how has a failure or an apparent failure set me up for later success, and whether I have a favorite failure and what specific lessons I learned from that failure that
perhaps others might benefit from. So the first thing I've got to say about this is that I've failed many, many times throughout my consulting career. You'd certainly need more than 150 episodes of a podcast to go through them all. But I really believe that old phrase that if you're not failing, then you're not trying and you're not pushing yourself and you're reducing your chance of true success. As you know, Nick, I really like sporting analogies. So I'm going to quote Michael Jordan. And for those who perhaps don't know who he is or was, probably the best basketball player of all time. And Jordan said something like this: I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career, lost over 300 games, and 26 times, I think he said, he's been asked to take the game-winning shot and missed. Jordan said, I failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. So there are three important things for me about failure. The first thing is don't think about failure. Visualize success. So to extend my sporting analogy and move to a different sport, I play golf. And you know what, Nick? If I'm hitting a shot into the green, I'm trying to get it close to the pin. If I see a bunker on one side and water on the left, bunker on the right, water on the left, bunker on the right, you know what? If I'm thinking that, pretty much bound to go in either the bunker or the water. What I must do to avoid the water is stop thinking about it. As any golfer will know, you'll increase your chance of putting it onto the green if you visualize success. So first thing about failure is don't think about failure. Visualize success. Second thing, even if you do visualize success, of course, sometimes you do fail. Sometimes it does go in the bunker or in the water. So my second key point is when you fail, own it. Recognize it. Understand what happened. And this sort of comes back to the self-awareness thing that I mentioned in the earlier question. If you don't recognize the failure, then the likelihood is you'll either make a bad situation worse by accelerating the path to failure, or perhaps you'll repeat that failure again. So this then takes me to the third really important thing about failure, and that's learn from the failure. What went wrong? What will you try not to do again? Or what will you do differently next time? And if you're not doing that, then you're kind of wasting the opportunity that the failure gives you. So they're the three big things for me about failure. Don't think about it. Even if you do, recognize that you will fail and own that, and then learn what you can from it. So, Nick, you asked for a favorite failure. Well, I'm not sure I would call it a favorite one, but there's one that I recall quite clearly from probably pretty early in my consulting career, which is definitely a defining moment for me. And it changed how I approached being a consultant and the way I worked. So I'm going back, well, it's over 20 years now, 25 years maybe. So a piece of work I did for a client when I was at KPMG Consulting. And this was a efficiency review of central support services, you know, the kind of thing like finance, HR, admin, etc., at the center of the organization. Now, at that time, as I say, I was at KPMG, and at that stage of my career, I thought the job of a consultant was to really rigorously examine the business problem, analyze the cause, identify the solutions or the opportunities for improvement, and then, of course, recommend the option that delivered the highest benefit, the biggest return on investment. So I've been a consultant by that time for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, maybe a bit more. And I conducted my review really thoroughly, and I was pretty proud of the piece of work. And amongst my recommendations was the outsourcing of what was the payroll function of this organization. Now, I've done the competitor analysis, I've done the benchmarking, I'd assessed the risks, and as I say, in my arrogance at the time, I thought I'd done a pretty good job, and the business case was very, very clear to move on and outsource the payroll. The savings to be made were pretty significant. As I say, the business risks probably minimal. So I sort of presented the report to the finance director, waited for him to call me up and asked for assistance with the outsourcing process itself and get that great kind of thing that all consultants are looking for, the extension. Well, I sat and the call never came from the finance director, which kind of surprised me because I thought the finance case was really powerful, and given his role, he would be straight onto it. So I do remember I called him up, telephoned him, asked for feedback on the range of different recommendations, particularly the outsourcing of the payroll one. And he just said to me, Mark, we're just not going to do that. Simple as that. And it was one of those conversations where you get the very clear impression that there was nothing else to be said. He was closing it down. He'd made his decision and that was it. Now, I continued to be puzzled. I wasn't going to let this one go. And why this pretty sensible, rational person had not taken on board my wonderful advice and my fantastic recommendations. So I do remember contacting a few of the other people that I'd got to know in the course of the review in the client and asking what's gone on and why wasn't the FD going to outsource payroll. And I very clearly remember the light bulb moment when one member of the client said to me, Mark, when you made that recommendation, did you not know that his wife is head of payroll? That was when the penny dropped. You see, the lesson in that was that, yes, of course, part of the job of a good consultant is analysis, assessment, evaluation, delivering a great business case. But being a good consultant isn't just about that. That's only part of the job. You have to understand context, stakeholder interest, different perspective, personal goals and ambitions and individual agendas. All of the stuff which is probably a lot harder to write down, a lot harder to get at, but really crucial because organizations that we work in as consultants are entities of human beings. And all of their personal agendas and their personal perspectives are a really important thing if you're going to effect change. Sometimes just as important, if not more important, than the analysis and the rational and the logical stuff. So, to my lesson, if I'd been more aware of the fact that the FD and the head of payroll were husband and wife, which of course wasn't a secret in the company, then I may or may not have made a different recommendation, but 100% for sure, I'd have definitely handled the situation differently. So the people stuff is just as important, if not more important, than the analysis and the logic stuff that many of us as consultants really revert to, sometimes doing our clients a disservice in doing so. So that was my failure that really taught me a lot through the rest of my consulting career. So to the third question, and you ask, how have I approached goal setting in my career and what, if anything, this approach to goal setting has changed as I've progressed through my career. And he specifically asked me to provide an example of a significant goal and how I approached and helped to achieve it. Now, I have to say, Nick, this is a really good question. It has had me thinking quite a lot. So I'm going to, of course, give you my honest answer here, but I do want to put a big health warning on this answer that I'm not recommending my approach as the right one or saying that this is the one people should follow. So take this as a bit of self-revelation rather than any career advice. And I suspect that's probably what you're looking for in your podcasts generally. So when I thought about this, I recognized that my approach to goal setting has certainly changed pretty significantly over time. As a jobbing consultant, if you say, during perhaps the first third or half of my career, I was definitely very, very goal focused. I wanted a clear set of objectives each year. And at any point in time during the course of the year, I could pretty much tell you how I was performing against those objectives and the progress I was making towards the annual appraisal at the year end. And that appraisal was really important to me. That allowed me to find out whether I succeeded or failed, give me a pretty good indication of what bonus or promotion or pay rise I was likely to get. And I guess there's nothing wrong with any of that, but my reflection on that is it's quite transactional. Now, as I move through into probably the second half of my career and more particularly into senior leadership roles, be that partner or chief executive or executive vice president or whatever, I recognize stepping back that my approach to goal setting has been probably, annual goal setting, let me put it this way, has probably been to take it less and less seriously. My approach to goal setting has probably been more longer term and more transformative than transactional. And of course, longer term and transformational stuff probably go together. You rarely get transformational change in a very short period of time. So look, I'm not sure whether this is good or bad, and I don't know whether this there's something about me or maybe something about the roles that I've taken on. But if I think of perhaps the three most career-defining roles that I took on, that was when I became CEO of Hydra back in about 2005, when I moved to Hitachi Consulting in 2010, and then later on in 2014, I became head of Europe for RGP. Each one of those major career steps for me, I set myself some clear and, as I say, probably transformational longer-term goals, which were multi-year rather than anything else. So it might be helpful if I take each one of those in turn and try and give a bit of life to these examples. So at Hydra, when I joined, the goal was very clear. It was to grow and sell the business, probably within 5 years. And my recollection is we did actually talk about that as the timescale. So I joined the company in 2004, went on to become CEO a year or so later. And we, the senior management, knew that the sale of the business would not be quick, but there was a requirement by shareholders to do this within a reasonable period of time, probably, as I say, within 5 years. That was what drove me on. So yes, I had individual objectives, goals year to year, but it was that overall overarching ambition that really drove my actions and my behaviors as the CEO. So second example I'll highlight was when I went to Hitachi Consulting, and I joined a business at that time that was losing money within the UK. There'd been a couple of acquisitions of businesses that had not been integrated very well for a number of different reasons. And clearly there were things going wrong. So the goal here, my goal and the goal of the senior management team when we were recruited at roughly similar period of time, the goal here was, again, multi-year, turn the business around, start making some money, growing the business rather than shrinking, and really importantly, integrating the business consulting and the technology part of the organization. Now, look, there were many people who contributed to a successful outcome in that journey. But just speaking for myself and the role that I had to play, for me, I always thought it was going to be a 2-3 year timescale. And that, again, was the kind of horizon within which I set my goal. So third and final example in answer to this question, at RGP, for those listeners who don't know, is a NASDAQ-quoted US business that operates globally. Major operations in North America, but it's got a European business and an Asia-Pac business. So I was recruited to be head of Europe in 2014, and that business, the European business that is, was failing. It losing money hand over fist and have been for a few years, is operating in 10 different countries. It probably halved in size since the 2008 crash. And against that background, I realized that the turnaround, what I'd been brought in to do, was not going to be overnight. And again, I remember setting out a turnaround plan. And I remember very clearly the three major steps that I put in place to effect that turnover. Stop the losses. First one. Second one, identify the clients, the countries, the people, the capabilities that were necessary to drive forward future high performance. And then thirdly, be relentless about focusing on those things, i.e. the things that were going to secure success, and not getting distracted by short-term challenges and bumps in the road, really. Now, as I said earlier, in each one of those three examples, yes, of course, I had annual targets and objectives, but probably in significant contrast to earlier in my career, it's true to say I was not obsessed by those. In my head, I was much clearer about what I thought was the real purpose of my job, and that was, as I say, the transformational, not the transactional. Now, just to repeat what I said at the beginning, all of this probably says more about me and maybe some of the roles I've taken on. I wouldn't necessarily be a lesson that you can apply to all goal setting. But, well, thanks for the question. It really, really has made me think. So the next question asked me to reflect on what sets apart the best consultants from the rest and whether I have recognized any common traits that I can see in consultants at the top of their game. Are there any specific behaviors or mindsets that consistently lead to success? Another great question and really, really appropriate for this kind of podcast. Of course, the answer to what makes a great consultant varies slightly depending on the type of consulting work, size of the consulting business you're operating in, the seniority and the role that the consultant undertakes. However, based on my experience, I can think of probably 5, maybe even 6 key attributes that I look for, or maybe that I've observed in the very best consultant. First of all, and this relates to an answer I gave to one of the earlier questions, I would say emotional intelligence. Yes, you need a certain IQ, be a consultant, but the very best consultants I've seen have a high level of EQ, emotional intelligence or emotional quotient. Now, whether you're in a sales role or a delivery role, in my experience, almost all consultancy businesses involve you working in teams. And of course, usually working in a new client environment or a new target client where, by definition, significant change is taking place, and you as a consultant are part of that change and often an agent of that change. So in this kind of situation, the ability to understand emotions, to use and manage your own emotions in positive ways, to observe those around you and the situation that they're grappling with and the emotions that they're going through, to communicate effectively, the ability to empathize with others and overcome challenges and diffuse conflict that you often get in situations that are fraught with a high degree of tension and change. They are all absolutely critical for success. As I say, whether you're in a sales environment or a delivery environment. And in my experience, the very best consultants have this EQ in spades. So that's the first attribute, EQ, emotional intelligence. The second thing I would probably point to is the ability to truly understand the client's problem. The very best consultants really take time and reflect deeply to dig into this before even starting to think about solutions. Too often where I've seen consultants and consultancy projects fail, it's because the consultancy or the consultant themselves takes what they did at the last client because it worked well there and seeks to impose it on their new client. Or they seek to impose the latest product or solution maybe that their organization is pushing and leverage it in to this client environment, the new client environment. So all of that, in my experience, is very often, if not always, a recipe for failure. The very best consultants really get underneath the client and really get into the detail of the client problems. What's the problem that the client's got? What's caused the problem? And what is the cost of not solving the problem? Only when you answer those questions for the very best consultant, then go on to think, okay, what are the appropriate solutions that can address those problems? So firstly, EQ. Secondly, understanding client's problem. Third attribute I would highlight is a hunger to learn. Think about what consultants can do better or differently, to learn new skills, to try yourself in new situations. And something that comes with the hunger to learn is the critical requirement of the very best consultants, in my experience, are never afraid to ask for help. You probably have to have a degree of humility, so that may be a sub kind of category here, humility in the consultant, but you should never, ever be afraid to ask for help. In fact, I would put it strongly that the very best consultants always ask for what I would call the right kind of help. Consultants are asking colleagues for a different perspective, a new insight, an understanding, a challenge to their thinking, and they are the very best people to work alongside. So have a hunger to learn, have a hunger to ask your colleagues what it is that they can do to help you. Fourth point, this is probably a realization that I've come to in perhaps the last 10, 15 years or so of my career, is that in my experience, the very best consultants have lots of, and that was happiness. They're happy in their job. I guess another kind of play on this would be, and one that's certainly become popular in recent years, is that people, consultants, but many, if not all people in the workforce, need to have good mental health to be performing at their best. One of the concepts I really love in this context is that of sweet spot for a consultant. the sweet spot is when you get that interaction of the consultant skills, the requirements or needs of the business that the consultant is working for, and then what the consultant enjoys doing. And if you don't get that third ingredient in place, actually ensuring the consultant is working on something that makes them happy and gives them pleasure and enthusiasm, then in my experience, you probably have a kind of suboptimal performance from the consultant. Now, not necessarily overnight and not necessarily every day, but if you're being asked to work 8-hour days, 10, 12, 15-hour days in very tense, challenging environments, and you're not enjoying what you're doing, then I think your performance suffers. So, in my experience, the very best consultants have a high level of pleasure from what they do. Final and fifth thing, before I sum up, I would say you have to, as a consultant, probably be at ease with ambiguity and uncertainty. You're not often a line manager, certainly in the advice you give to your clients. You have a limited, if not zero, ability to implement that. So that creates a little bit of uncertainty for you. You know, are your recommendations going to be listened to? Are they going to be taken on board? Are they going to be implemented as you see fit? You have to be familiar with the ambiguity of being thrown into a client environment and being able to feel your way around it from start to 100 miles an hour really, really quickly. And be used to dealing with a vast range of stakeholders, internal stakeholders within the consultant organization and stakeholders in the client, and balancing the different requirements that they've got. So I'm sure there are many other facets as well, but my reflections are that the very best consultants have high EQ, a relentless focus on truly understanding the client's problem, a real hunger to learn and ask for help. They have a role in which they can be happy and they're enthused and they've got good mental health. And finally, they're at ease with ambiguous and uncertain situations. The final question you asked me to reflect on was what book or books I've read since our last interview that had greatly influenced my thinking or approach to consulting and leadership, and how I've applied the insights from these books into my work. Now, those listeners who recall the full podcast might remember that I rather indulged myself in answer to your book question, and I gave you, I think, not one, but 5 or 6 books that I recommend. Anyway, Nick, you'll be glad today that I'm going to restrict myself to one book I've come across in the last few months. It's called Alchemy, and it's by a guy called Rory Sutherland. Rory Sutherland is a British advertising executive, and he was, well, may still be, for all I know, the vice chairman of the Ogilvy and Mather group of companies. Now, this is a great fun book, so it's a really easy book to read, but it's a book I think that will stay with most readers. And if I tell you that the subtitle of the book is The Power of Ideas That Don't Make Sense, it kind of gives you some insight into the core concepts and argument underpinning the writing. I found this book so interestingly because it's really challenged me to look at myself differently, to approach business problems differently, and to look at the world around me, the business world around me, and indeed the non-business world around me in a new way. And for someone like me who, as I've already alluded to in answers to these questions, who's definitely for too long in my career thought the world could be understood by the application of logic and rational thinking, this book has been really invaluable to shape me out of that mindset. So we humans, and no matter what people say, consultants are human beings, we often think we're rational beings. But you know what? What this book has taught me is that that's just not true. Of course, there are rational aspects to our behavior and rational elements to our decision making, but how we make decisions very, very often in business as in our personal lives is irrational. So in his book, Rory's got 10 rules of alchemy, which is definitely worth any leader reflecting on. And if there's just one thing you do, grab those 10 rules of alchemy somewhere from the internet and reflect on those. And they demonstrate some of the fun style he's got and some of the deep insights. So a couple of things I would just highlight, 2 of those rules I would highlight. One thing he says is the nature of our attention affects the nature of our experience. Second rule that Rory has is that the problem with logic is that it kills off magic. So how's this been applied to my working environment? Well, I guess I would say to myself and indeed to the consultants, recognize that you don't always have to make decisions in a rational way because we are not operating in a rational world. Sometimes the very best decisions, the very best analysis, the very best insights come from an illogical, irrational place. And that's okay. That is okay. Understand that context, and it can really broaden your mind about many, many different ways in which we can address the challenge we have as consultants. So a great book, Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. Highly recommend it.
If you are enjoying today's episode, I would love to hear your thoughts. We thrive on feedback, and it would mean so much to me if you could take 10 seconds to go to your podcast app, leave us a review, and let me know how we are doing. Let me know what this podcast is doing for you. Let me know what you would like us to see, what guest you would like to hear from next. Your feedback helps us make this podcast better for you and for all of our other listeners. Thank you in advance. And now let's get back to the show.
So the first question is, can you share a pivotal moment in your career that significantly influenced or altered your approach to leadership? What was the context and what did you learn from it? So I worked way back in the early 2000s with a great boss, a gentleman named Linton Barker, who was the chief executive of a really exciting public sector consultancy called Hydra, where I spent a number of years. And the lesson was all about really always trying to put yourselves in the shoes of your client in whatever work you're doing in consulting, and always trying to do the right thing, no matter how frustrated you might get, how much you might want to pull your hair out or send a pointy email, just always putting yourself in the client's shoes and doing the right thing for them in any moment. So it's a great example of that. At Hydra, we were a subcontractor to a really big global IT firm on a really large government IT program. It was a huge part of our business, but it was our subcontract with them was relatively small fish in terms of their overall work. And 2 years into that, we were at the point where we needed to negotiate our contract extension for the next 5 years. And that was going to be hugely important to Hydra's business. And it was something I was working really closely with Linton on. And so that renegotiation, that work was absolute top of the agenda for us as a firm, relatively small, as I said, in terms of priorities for the company we were working as a subcontractor to. And because it wasn't top priority for them, it kind of led to delays, and we would feel like we weren't getting the attention that the matters needed. And just lots of pent up frustrations about how things were working and the impact it was having on us as a business. And I was still relatively junior. And there are times when I feel exceptionally frustrated and kind of want to send an email with an ultimatum or just kind of make my point. And Linton constantly encouraged me to really think about what might be happening on the client side that would be causing delays. What are the pressures that the individuals we're dealing with feeling themselves that might have nothing to do with us that are creating whatever delays or things might be happening? When I'd want to send an email that was maybe a bit kind of to the point, you think about really, how is that going to land? How can you say the same thing and get some momentum into a process, but without having it sound pointy? And so we persevered, and he coached me through that. But we always did that in a really respectful manner and with a smile on our faces. And that didn't mean we didn't apply pressure. That didn't mean we sometimes didn't have to escalate things, but we did it in a way that was hugely respectful about the client and the position they might be in. And that lesson's really stayed with me ever since. There are lots of times in business and consulting when things can get really frustrating, can get really pressured, and it can be really tempting to get a bit punchy. And whenever I find myself in that situation, or when I'm working with colleagues who are in that situation, just try to remember the lessons that Linton taught me about keeping cool, always behaving in a really respectful way, and just always thinking about what's going on in the client and how would it feel if you were in their shoes, and then acting accordingly. So that's a big lesson for me on that one. How has a failure or an apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure? What specific lessons did you learn that others might benefit from? Well, I'm not sure I'd say I have a favorite failure, but I did learn a lot about myself and about opportunities when I left KPMG back in 2018, that would have been. So I'd been at KPMG for about 7 years and a partner for 2 years when the firm started going through quite a significant restructuring in the UK firm. They were making changes across the business, including in the public sector practice where I was working. And as those changes started to come online, I realized that I faced a choice about whether I wanted to leave the UK firm and explore opportunities with KPMG in other parts of the world, or whether I wanted to make the leap and leave KPMG completely after all the years there. And because I hadn't been a partner for that long and worked really hard to achieve it, it wasn't a choice I was expecting to have to make. And so it caused lots of soul searching. But ultimately, what I decided to do was to go that was the right thing for me. And it wasn't too long after I'd left the firm that I realized that had been absolutely the right decision for me, and ultimately the right decision for KPMG, even though it was kind of something unexpected that had come up. And as I reflected on my time there, I realized two really important things. First, I realized I'd learned a huge amount from KPMG about how to operate and be a leader in a really successful consultancy. The firm gave me amazing opportunities to build skills, to make connections with really wonderful clients. I learned the importance of strong governance and process and why those things are really critical to helping you do the right thing by your clients and your people and ultimately succeed financially as a business. But the second thing I realized is that I'm at my happiest and most successful when I'm working in a smaller business. The opportunities for me personally that you get when working in a small growing consultancy are just really different from those that come in a big firm. And I've learned over the years that I'm at my best and enjoying things the most when I'm in kind of smaller growing consultancies. And I'd say those two learnings about what I took that was really positive and about what I liked that would be different have really served me well in the time since I've left there. They helped me focus on what I wanted to do and where I'd be happiest. And they've also given me confidence to take the great things I learned from KPMG and apply them in other places. And had I not left, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to take what I'd learned and apply it in other roles that I've really, really loved. So from that difficult decision about leaving has come a whole series of things that have been great personally, professionally, but that absolutely wouldn't have happened had the change at KPMG not also happened. So the lesson for me in all of that is that sometimes unexpected things can create opportunities that you weren't necessarily seeing on the horizon, but when they do happen, turn out to be really great. And so as those things come along in life, you just got to kind of trust that everything probably happens for a reason, cliche as that may sound, and you're going to be stronger on the other side of it. Even if in the moment things aren't working out exactly as you had planned, there's always opportunity that can come from the other side of that. So the question is, how have you approached goal setting during your career, and what, if anything, about this approach has changed as you've advanced in your career? Can you provide an example of a significant goal and how your approach helped you achieve it? So I'd say I learned a long time ago that if I want to achieve something, whether that's at work or in my personal life, I'm most likely to succeed when I've got two things in place. First, I need to have a really clear plan for what I need to do, the steps I need to take to reach the goal I've set for myself. And second, I've got to get myself really, really focused every single day on the hard work of executing that plan and making it happen. Now, I will admit, I've never really been one for explicitly setting long-term career goals. I found over the years that you never quite know what's going to be on the horizon, and I've tended to respond more to opportunities that have presented themselves than to say, in 3-4 years' time, I want to be doing X. But looking back, I know that when I did achieve the big things that I wanted to do, it was having a clear plan and working methodically towards that's made those things possible. So as an example, in my recent role where I was the chief executive of Channel 3 Consulting, I had the opportunity to lead a management buyout of the firm from its original founders. Now, I had no idea how one went about doing that, but when the opportunity came up, I knew it was something that I wanted to make happen. So a really clear goal. Because I didn't know how one made that happen, I set about working with lots of people to educate myself from those who had done similar things, to get advice on how the processes needed to work, what the experience would be like, and to help the founders who were going to be looking to sell the business also build their understanding. And that process of information gathering gave us everything we needed to build a really, really solid plan for how we were going to execute it over the coming months. The team and I, both the founders and the team that was going to stay in the business, then worked every single day on executing that plan. It was to huge focus, lots of adjustments along the way. But that combination of having a really strong plan, a really good understanding of what we needed to do, and a relentless focus on making it happen allowed us to achieve the result we wanted to achieve. And we successfully completed the management buyout a number of months later. Now, that kind of combination of have a plan and do it probably sounds really simplistic, but I think if I look back on the meaningful things that I feel I've been able to achieve, whether that was personally or professionally, and where I reflect on things where I was probably less successful, when it's worked really well is when I've had that plan and that laser focus on execution. Having worked with countless consultants, what sets the best apart from the rest? And what common traits do you see in those at the top of their game? Are there specific behaviors or mindsets that consistently lead to success? So I'd say I think there are three things that help consultants succeed. First is say yes. Second is make it about the client, not about you. And third is be kind to people and share. So I'll explain what I mean by those. So first, saying yes and getting involved. I think this is particularly important at the start of a consulting career, but it applies throughout. In my experience, the best consultants are the people who are always willing to put their hand up and get involved in solving a challenge, helping with a new project, or just turning their hand to whatever is needed in the business at the time. And I think there's two reasons for that being really important. Number one, it's a great way for people to learn, and knowledge ultimately makes you more successful and more in demand. Being in demand is important in a consulting business. And number two, it shows people they can count on you, both for hard work and for enthusiasm. And the people who get counted on inevitably end up being the people who clients want to work with, who colleagues want to put onto their projects, and who, in my experience, really do well in the business. So second, I said, make it about the client, not about you. Consultants have a real privilege of helping clients with some of the most challenging problems. You get the opportunity to listen and to learn in some, really interesting and sometimes challenging situations, and then working with clients, offer potential solutions based on your experience and the experience that others can bring. And I think to be able to come up with great solutions, there's the really critical part of the client interaction is around listening and learning. The more you do that, the more you show real empathy for whatever situation the client is dealing with, the more you'll be able to work with them to create a solution that's right for them. And then as you implement that solution, I think it's really important that you make any successes be all about the client. You've got to make them the champion of the story, make them the hero. If you're writing a case study, write about what the client and their team achieved. Of course, throw in a bit about what you and your company did to help, but ultimately, I think it's really important to put the consultancy and you in the background and put the client right out in front. I think doing that really helps with building long-term relationships with clients who will want to work with you over and over again. I think it helps build trust, and it gives them absolute confidence that what you're really interested in is their success in the problem they've asked you to help solve, not in your own. So the third thing I said was about being kind and sharing. And with that, I mean, just be nice to people, share your knowledge, share your opportunities, share your time and your support, and just be really kind to people along the way. Consulting can be a really tough gig. There's a lot of pressure from clients. There's pressure we put on ourselves. And that can sometimes lead to people going into themselves a bit, being a bit pointy-elbowed about opportunities or relationships they have with clients. And I just don't feel that, in my experience, anything good ever comes for you, for your colleagues, or for your firm when that kind of slightly pointy, closed-in behavior starts to happen. Instead, I think long-term success ultimately comes from being someone who's got a reputation for being good and easy to work with, someone who looks after other people, who's nice to other people, and who collaborates really well. So I guess my advice for anyone in consulting, but especially people in leadership roles, is try really hard not to let the pressure get to you. Be kind to people, open yourself up to sharing and collaboration as just your default mechanism for how you work with people. So for the last question, you've said, since our last interview, what book or books have you read that have greatly influenced your thinking or approach to consulting and leadership? How have you applied the insight from those books in your work? So there's a great book called Traction by a gentleman named Gino Wickman that's all about how you put the basic structures in place for running a great business. It's built around something that they call the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. And in essence, it offers a really easy to understand and easy to use framework about how you do things like getting clear on your business vision and your business plan, getting the right people in the right roles to succeed, and putting the structures and processes in place that are going to be key to enabling a business to scale up. One of the things that I've seen in a scaling business, whether it was some business I was working in or businesses I run myself, is that you hit a point where you need a degree of structure and process and governance that you haven't necessarily needed before, but that if you don't put in place, you're going to struggle to succeed going forward. The things you need to put in place are usually fairly standard, but it can take a lot of time to work out what those things are on your own. And for some entrepreneurs, it can be difficult to accept that you actually need them. So I think Traction's a great book for anybody who's reaching that point to have a look at. It's really easy to read. It starts by explaining why the kind of stuff they recommend is important as a business grows, then gives you a really good off-the-shelf model for things like setting your vision, building effective management meetings, getting the right cadence around those meetings, getting the right people into them, getting the right data in place to support things. It helps with a framework for prioritizing work that a company's doing or that you're doing personally and getting the right work into the right people's hands. So I found it just be a great model. And I think implementing it can help accelerate, get it and take the pain out of lots of the building block stuff that you need to do to get a business on the right footing for growth and success.
Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.